Warning: this program is designed for mature audiences. Topics being discussed are not always safe for young or immature individuals. Be aware of the people around you if listening to this openly. The opinions expressed in this show belong to the person actually making the statement. Remember that opinions are just that and may have supporting evidence or none at all. If you agree, great. If you don't, great. Tell us your views. The conversation has officially begun. There is no right or wrong, us versus them, etc. Speak your mind and be respectful. Now, on to the show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and to any of my insomniacs out there, good night to you. I am your host, Ben Shellbrook, and this is episode 2 of Shellbrook Speaks Out. Today's topic will be on assisted suicide. Not kind of the direction that I'm taking the show in today, but if you or any of your loved ones, friends, family, if you're in help or think that any of your friends or family, loved ones may need help, there is a suicide and crisis lifeline. It can be reached at 988 in the United States, and you can also reach it at 988lifeline.org. So just want to throw that out there in case that's where somebody's headspace is at the moment. If you needed to hear that, I hope you heard it. With that to the side, I just want to kind of go ahead and jump right in and get the show started. But for someone that, like I was saying, is close to end of life and they don't want to have to deal with any of the suffering or any of the downfalls that they want, maybe they still have some life left in them, but they know that from a certain point that their health is going to degrade so bad, so quick that they want their family members to remember them at this stage without going further. And also depending on that family to help maintain them through the end of their days. I am going to go over the pros and cons, kind of mixed in there, and I will state it as such when I get to those points. Basically my own opinion as I'm going through those pros or cons. After that, I will open the door for any feedback for people to respond to what I was saying, maybe get some other points of views. Maybe you or someone you know has dealt with like a situation like this. So let's go ahead and get on moving with that. So I did a quick list of pros and cons. I have 10 pros, 10 cons, and like I said, I'll insert my opinions here and there as I run through them. I will state, hey, this is my thought. This isn't reflecting on someone else. So the first pro is relief of suffering. So someone that is terminally ill, usually there's some form of pain, whether it's from a disability coming from it, the illness itself, any of the conditions that are attached to whatever their illness is, the relief from that pain. So if they're at the end stage of life and that pain is just too unbearable to continue on with, then that relief of suffering is a pro for that person. And before I go any further, I do want to state that I feel that the pros and cons that I've come up with are more or less from the point of view of someone sitting in those shoes of being terminally ill, that I could see someone actually, how do you want to say this? I could see somebody having to go through and deal with this on a personal level, and that's kind of where I gauge the pros and cons that I've come up with. So moving on, pro number 2 would be autonomy. So say you have a debilitating illness that is taking you through the last stages, and it's kind of a control thing. People want to have control over their own lives, and in that same breath, they want to have control over their own death. So having that autonomy, it kind of gives them the respect to have their own personal choice. Pro number 3, and for me personally, I think between the pain and number 3, dignity, I think these are the top 2. So assisted suicide can help patients die with dignity and avoid the unnecessary suffering which can be associated with the dying process. I've lost a lot of family members on my own. I know that some of the people out there listening, they've had to go through the same thing, and it's hard. It's hard for us as the family members or friends to sit there and watch a loved one just having to sit there and waste away. Now, if that person decided well before when they found out, hey, this this is the path that I'm on right now. They could have had the choice to have that dignity and that quality of life kind of reinstated to them if they were given the choice or the opportunity to say, hey, this is where I'm going to cut my ties. They don't have to go through that suffering. You don't have to have those memories. I know that some of these topics are kind of hard to speak on. Some of them are kind of hard to hear, but that's kind of the point of my channel or my podcast is lay these topics out. I mean, kind of get them out there, air them out, and get other people's opinion on things. Pro number 4, compassion. Assisted suicide can be an act of passion, providing a means for a terminally ill patient to end their suffering and pain in a peaceful manner. They're not having to go through the end stages, and as we stated before, or as I stated before, they're not having that pain and that suffering until they take their final breath and their final heartbeat. They can basically be administered or handed so they can consume or ingest a medicine that will, from what I've seen, it looks like they just kind of drift off into sleep, but it's not really sleep. My understanding is it looks like they're going to sleep, but they're slipping into a coma. And instead of being able to revive out of that coma, that they just continue on to the process of death until it's over. Number 5 is family closure. Assisted suicide can provide a sense of closure for the family and loved ones of a dying patient who are often faced with the burden of providing care and support. I've been more than willing to do it for any of the family members that I've had to be there at the end with them. I will do anything for my family. There have been times where my mother, unable to get out of the bed, if she asked me to do something, grab something, pretty much anything. At that point, whatever you want, I've got it. But that's my willingness to do something for her. She never said as much, but that kind of strips them of their independence. What kind of mentality are they going through? Well, man, I really hate asking my son or my daughter to keep doing this just because I can't get out of bed. I can't get out of a wheelchair. I can't walk. I can't shower. I can't use the bathroom on my own. I can't do anything without some sort of assistance from someone. And over time, I mean, you never know when that moment's going to be. You never know what one day to the next is going to be like. That I've seen without even having to experience myself. So, I mean, maybe they don't want to place that burden on their friends and family or the medical staff. If they get right there at the beginning stages of they're unable to perform on their own, then maybe they should be given the option of, okay, I think it's time, and then going back to the how do I want to be remembered? And it kind of gives the family some form of closure without having to drag them down this rabbit hole of regardless of how willing the friends and family are or the medical staff, whoever it may be, no matter how willing they are to be there and provide for this family member or friend, as I've said, but it's not our choice. It's not our life. And I will, when I get to the end of the pros, I will kind of give some of my own personal stipulations that I think should be kind of thrown in with this. Going on to number 6, financial relief. Assisted suicide can provide financial relief for patients and their families who could otherwise have to bear the financial burden of ongoing medical care and support. Once again, kind of going back on my own experience, palliative care and hospice care has always been an option, and it's always been a no-cost option. But what about people that don't have that afforded to them, or maybe they just refuse? Maybe that's not what they want. I mean, I know for hospice, and I believe it does carry over to palliative care, I think they're pretty interchangeable terms. I'm no medical expert. If you want to see if there's a difference, by all means, look it up, call me out on it. But from my experience, they're pretty interchangeable. And one of the stipulations that I've seen that kind of carries across the board is once you go into this program, any of the medications that you currently are on to either try to help fight your illness, to anything that's trying to keep you alive or fight for you, for lack of better terms, all those medicines, they go away. They are not given to you anymore. They are replaced with essentially pain medication. And the limits for the pain medications, I think, are, once again, my opinion, but I think they're a little unruly. If it's hard nowadays to get pain medication medication prescribed by a doctor unless you are just in some form of serious pain. But for someone under the care of hospice or palliative care, there are limitations to how much medicine they can be given. But I do think that the lines kind of blur as they know this person's not going to be with us much longer. Let's just make them comfortable and keep them out of pain, which I have no objection against that. I don't want someone to suffer or be in pain at the end. But I've also seen times where maybe my feeling is that they're being over medicated, that, okay, this person's no longer in pain, but we do have them on a schedule. Okay, let's go ahead and give them this other pain pill because this one's supposed to be wearing off in the next 30 minutes. And from that point, I've seen someone take 2 doses of pain medication and then never wake back up. They were still alive. Their body was still functioning. They just never woke up because the pain medication just kind of kept them knocked out. And a day later, that person was no longer with us. And I'm not trying to say that, like I said, I don't disagree with, I understand that going through the hospice or palliative care, the whole purpose of that program is to give you a more comfortable end of life. I understand it. I get it. But I also think there should be a little bit more guideline to the pain med. Like I said, I'm no doctor either. I don't know. I can't say that, well, Grandma Susan shouldn't be giving this many pain pills in a 24-hour period. I'm not allowed to do that. That's not me. Well, I've kind of hammered on that one for a little bit. I'm going to continue on. Number 7 is reduced stress. Assisted suicide can reduce the stress and anxiety for terminally ill patients who are often overwhelmed by the physical and emotional strain of their illness. So kind of going back to the relief on the family, every time they're having to ask you to do something for them, or just the fact that maybe they can't do it on their own and there's not somebody there, that's stressful. That creates a point of anxiety for that person. And there's no good thing about having stress or anxiety added to your life, but especially when you're at the final stepping stone of life, that's just an additional rock to carry through your final journey. Number 8 is individual choice. Assisted suicide is a personal choice and should be respected as such, allowing individuals to make decisions about their own lives. Now, I've seen overseas that this has been something that was approved. There are guidelines for it. I don't necessarily know the exact guidelines, but they are in place. And I have watched a few documentaries about how the process worked. Now, here in the United States, from what I've seen, there's only maybe a handful of states in the U.S. that allow this. Once again, my personal opinion, this should be offered, but the guidelines that are attached to it should be very stringent. There is a lot of opportunity for it to be misused, abused, misunderstood even. Moving on to number 9, lower healthcare costs. Assisted suicide can lower healthcare costs associated with long-term care, ongoing medical expenses, and other end-of-life treatment. So this kind of ties in with the financial relief. Anyone that you know that may go through, say, cancer treatments, maybe they've beat it. Maybe they've beat cancer, but there was also a cost associated with that. All of that treatment is not free. Insurance does not cover everything. You even have insurance companies that will say, oh, no, pre-existing condition, we're not covering any of that. I've seen it. So instead of racking up all this high healthcare cost and medical expenses just to go to rest and then leave that burden on your family, on your spouse, on your children, maybe all that could just be avoided. And number 10 on my list is improved quality of life. This is another one. I would say this would be, out of the other 2 I mentioned, this would round out my top 3. Assisted suicide can improve the quality of life for patients who are suffering from debilitating conditions, allowing them to live their remaining days with greater comfort and dignity. I mean, that just kind of speaks for itself. As I was stating earlier, a lot of people, when they find out they have a terminal illness, that as they progress through, they lose a lot of functionality, a lot of their abilities, and they rely on other people. I mean, anyone that goes, I hate to use this analogy, but anyone that goes gambling, if you walk into a casino, you walk in with $100 in your hand, you pull the slot machine a few times, next thing you know, you have $10,000 in your hand. The standing rule is the house always wins. You walked in with 100, you have 10,000 in your hand. Get out while the getting's good. You've won. You're one of the lucky few. Get out. The same thing with end of life. Once you start on that downhill struggle, that's as best as it's going to be. It's not going to get better. Yes, you may have good days and bad days, but overall, it's not going to get better. So I said that in between the pros and cons that I was going to kind of insert my 2 cents worth. So the relief of suffering, actually, before I even start on that, just being given the option to have someone in the medical field, a trained professional that can sit down, explain everything to you, and let you do this. That option I at least think should be available. Now going to the top 3 that I was speaking on earlier, the suffering, the dignity, and the quality of life. Those 3. So I mentioned that I think there should be stipulations on making this an option or letting this be a choice. One of the first things that I think should take place is, okay, doctor, your primary doctor says, okay, you have a terminal illness. We'll just say cancer. You have a form of cancer that cannot be treated. You can take medicine for the rest of your days. They will not cure you. They will just help maintain you until the cancer takes over and you die. However long that may be, that will be the role that you take. But to have the option to sit down with another medical professional and say, okay, my primary doctor said I have cancer. This is how the rest of my days are going to turn out. Have more than one doctor verify this before being able to be presented the option to end your life. Because it would be a terrible thing for a simple misdiagnosis of something as simple as maybe you looked at the wrong chart. Maybe your test was, maybe some of the testing was tainted or had some kind of outside contamination and it showed you as having cancer. I don't know if these are options, but I'm just trying to use Joe Blow common sense of things that could go wrong. So have multiple doctors say, yep, this is the case. This is exactly what it is. If you have 2 or 3 doctors saying this is what you have, this is what you're going through, yes, you have cancer. This is roughly how long we're looking at until you expire. At that point, then I think the person should be given the option because there are plenty of options. I mean, when you get close to the end, the palliative care and the hospice, from all of my dealings that I've had to go through, those have just kind of been offered when it gets close to the end. Why can this not be an option that's at least explored? And some of the stipulations, I think, that's one of them, that you have to be verified by at least more than one doctor. I think there should be a minimum of 3. If you have 3 medical professionals say, hey, this is what you got, that's kind of a hard argument to go against. Another one is the person should be able to make this decision on their own, but only if they're capable of making that decision. If you have somebody that's suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, they may not be at the best mental stage to make a decision this important in their life. And I mean, that's basically like being at the end of a gun. If someone's pointing a gun at you and they're like, give me your wallet or I'm going to murder you, what do? Well, you're handing a loaded gun to anyone that is capable of representing your voice. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us trust our family members, but that's not something that I wouldn't want to be in control of. If I were put in that position, I would want to be the one to make that decision. If I'm not mentally capable of making that decision, I don't want anyone to make that decision for me. So I think that should be another guideline that kind of gets put into it. One of the last things that I can think of is that if this is ever presented as an option, I don't think the medical professional that is explaining this to the patient should have any weight. They should not be able to have any influence over which way the patient decides to go. If they want to refuse all treatment altogether, except for, going back to the cancer reference, if they want to continue their cancer treatment until their last day, that should be the option they're afforded. If they want to maintain maintain cancer treatment and end out in hospice or palliative care, fine. Let that be how it's done. If this ever becomes an option for the assisted suicide and they're capable of making that decision, that should be the option they're afforded. Where I'm saying they shouldn't be able to carry the influence is they should only be there solely for the information. They shouldn't make one thing sound better or one thing sound worse than the other. It should be strictly, solely the information involved with the process of each one of those items. They shouldn't say things like, well, you can continue with the cancer treatment, but that last month or last 2 months, we just want you to know that you won't be able to do anything on your own. I'm sure that a lot of doctors have dealt with things like that, and yes, they do. They have a great understanding of the medical field and how medicines work and how the bodies react, but you can't sit there and tell someone, yeah, that last month or two you won't be able to do anything. We're all different. We all react and respond differently. Yes, we're all flesh and blood, but we are not the same. We are all in fact different. So there's not a single template of this is how it's going to turn out. I think you should go this way. All of that influence should be left to the side. For the same purpose, I'm using a pseudonym to broadcast and host my podcast. Yes, I've dealt with media I've dealt with media for several years. I do have another following that has no idea of this venture in my life. So I don't want to cross those platforms. I don't want to carry influence from people that know about me and already know my thought process. I'm looking for a new audience, a brand new platform, so that it's basically start from scratch, start out fresh. Where can we go with this? So that's kind of my perception on how I think it should be implemented. That's not a very concise or precise guides, or that's not a very precise set of rules that I think should be implemented, but I think those need to be at least incorporated into it if it ever does become an option. If anyone out there would like to add to my list, or maybe you don't agree with my list, I will give my information at the end on how you can contact me, and in a follow-up episode or possibly the next episode, then we can include your thoughts, what your convictions are on assisted suicide. And that's kind of where I was hoping to lead with this whole podcast is, yes, I can sit here all day and let people hear my wonderful voice, but that's just a one-sided conversation. That means nothing to me. To be able to interact with people from all over the world, all different aspects of life, and get feedback and represent and package that feedback so that, yes, someone may respond to me, but if I'm spreading that to another 1,000 people, how is that affecting society? Can I possibly be the change that I'm hoping to leave for my children? Maybe, maybe not, but we'll find out. We'll push that to the side for a moment, and I want to go ahead and get into the list of cons that I've come up with. So, number one, ethical concerns. Assisted suicide raises ethical concerns about the value of human life and whether it's right to end a life prematurely. There are people that say you're born, you die. That's not a choice. That's just the way it happens. I have no argument for that. I can't change your belief. I'm not going to try to. Now, the second con is abuse potential. And this one, I kind of agree with it to a point. Assisted suicide has the potential to be abused, particularly in cases where patients are pressured into making the decision to end their lives. And that kind of goes back to where I was saying, if it ever becomes an option, that if a patient is presented with palliative care, hospice, assisted suicide, or to continue treatment, the medical professional should only give factual information. There should be no influence over that whatsoever. And as long as the patient is mentally stable and capable of making that decision of their own, then that's kind of where I think things should go. But if you have maybe a company that's similar to hospice, and maybe they get to charge an insurance company X amount of percent or X amount of dollars to to kind of, for every operation they perform to end someone's life, then you get that trade-off, human life for money. At that point, you're basically a legal assassin, and that's where it kind of gets out of bounds for me. So you also have kind of number 3 on my list for cons is I listed it as slippery slope. An assisted suicide may lead to a slippery slope where patients are not terminally ill or disabled, but may also be allowed to end their lives, leading to a devaluation of human life. So I don't think anyone outside of the terminally ill, and there should be, if it's going to stretch over into the disabled aspect, like paraplegic, quadriplegic, there has to be some form of debilitation that they cannot perform anything on their own. If you have somebody that is bedridden and someone has to do everything for them, if they feel that there is zero quality of life, that there is nothing left for them until they're at that point, I don't even think that should be an option that's even put on the table for discussion. And even then, I would have a hard time biting that bullet if I were in those shoes. To me, there's a very large difference between someone that's terminally ill and still functional versus somebody that is completely disabled. You could have somebody that's 100% disabled. They can talk, they can breathe, their heart functions just fine, just their limbs don't move. If I were in those shoes, I think I could find some quality of life. Now, there may be people that disagree with me. If you do, that's fine. I'm open for the discussion on that one. But yeah, I think those two roads or those two different avenues are just completely different. I don't think that should be offered to somebody that's just disabled. Number 4 on the list of cons is religious objection. Assisted suicide conflicts with the religious beliefs of many people who believe that only God has the power to determine when a person should die. I'm not going to debate religion with anyone. Everybody has their own set of beliefs, and I don't really want to argue anything with anyone. Whatever you believe, you by all means have every right to believe whatever it is that you believe in. If you believe there's one God up above, great for you. If you believe maybe more in a pagan aspect that there's a sun god, a wind god, anything nature, the earth god, any of that, if that's your belief, I love it. I don't necessarily believe on those same aspects, but like I said, we're all different. I'm not going to try to push my point of view over on somebody. I will explain my point of view and the way I think, and I will also listen to what you think or what your beliefs are. I'll listen. I'll openly listen, as long as you're not trying to push your beliefs upon me. And if I like your beliefs better, okay, great. Maybe I'll start incorporating some of that into my own life. But I think there's that fine line. Well, for me, it's not even a fine line. It's as long as I'm not pushing on you, you're not pushing on me, but we can still have an adult conversation and explain my view and your view, then we don't necessarily have to agree at the end of the conversation. But if I can understand what you're saying, if you understand what I'm saying, at least that understanding is the spread of knowledge that I'm trying to seek out. But once again, like I think I believe it's the Catholic religion that suicide automatically bans your potential to get into heaven. And I could see the Catholic religion trying to shoot an assisted suicide option down. But on the same hand, I don't think that would be the proper way of doing it. I think the better way would be, if it is opened up as an option, explaining to your congregation from the leadership that, hey, this is now an option, but as our religion states, if you take this route, your ticket to heaven is no more. So, I mean, am I wrong on that? If I am, please let me know. But like I said, I won't debate or argue religious points with anyone. Only thing I could do is explain my thoughts on things and listen to yours. Number 5 on the cons list is psychological harm. Assisted suicide can cause psychological harm to family members and loved ones who may feel guilty or responsible for the death of the patient. This one I can truly get behind. I've never felt that way, or I don't think I would feel that way. Anytime I've had a loved one passed and I've been there with them, I've never felt any form of guilt or responsibility for them being there. I mean, it's kind of obvious that I feel that this should be an option that's offered, but I think as if I were to place my mother or my father in these shoes and they said, son, this is an option I've been presented, it's been weighing heavy on my heart, and I think I'm going to go through with this. I think this is the route that I want to call the end. I would have to respect that. As long as I put no pressure or influence into that decision, I would stay 100% away from making that decision. If I were asked for information, okay, here's your doctor's name and number. I don't want to be part of that decision. The minute that I start putting input into it and they were to choose that route, somewhere in the back of my mind, I can see where the psychological part kind of weighs in. Well, man, now they're gone. Did they do this because of me? I hope not. But then you can never have that conversation with them again. So did they or didn't they? You'll never know. And that can, for some people, wear on their heart very, very heavily. And that is not a road that I would want to go down. Moving on to number 6, legal issues. Assisted suicide is illegal, not legal, in many countries, and its legalization may require significant changes to existing laws and regulations. I wholeheartedly believe that. Like, if the entire U.S. were to open this option up, there would be a significant change in healthcare, end-of-life care, insurance, anything associated in the medical field. There would be changes made, and it wouldn't just be on the federal level across the United States. It would have to go down to state level, county level, city level. I mean, this would be a massive change to be implemented for an entire country, and there would have to be several I's dotted and many T's crossed to make this an official thing. I think it would still, I think the best way to have it implemented would to be throw the options out to each state or county, probably the state level, and then it would have to trickle down to the city level. I don't think that moving this at a federal level would be very effective at all. It would just take too much time and effort and resource to make this a thing at one time across the entire United States. All right, going on down to number 7, we're on medical responsibility. Assisted suicide can place the responsibility for the death of a patient on a medical professional who may be reluctant to perform such procedures. Now, this is kind of one of those, I had the thought of maybe you have somebody that's in the medical field, maybe they work in an ER and bad crash, they finally get the person revived or they bring them back to life and they're like, I'm too torn up, I don't think I'm gonna make it, just go ahead and let me go. Well, at that point, whoever that nurse or doctor are in the ER, they now have this position of, well, I took an oath to save lives and now I have a patient tell me to end it, and it's just kind of thrown in their lap. That kind of goes back to where I don't think that option should be given in that situation. Like I said earlier, it should be reserved for someone that's deemed terminally ill and went through a whole verification process with multiple medical professionals. But on the other hand, what if it was someone that went into the hospice palliative care field and this is kind of their job? As long as everything goes in the proper manner, like go back to Kevorkian, for example, one of his patients was unable to administer the medication to themselves, so he assisted with actually injecting the medication to end someone's life. The difference between who pushes the plunger, it goes from a suicide to a murder. And I can't think of a single medical professional that would want to step over that bound. They take an oath or they have such a love for the medical field that they want to try to keep people alive, or when they know someone is close to the end, make them as comfortable as possible to finish out their days. Once you step over that line of handing someone a medication or setting up a mechanism for them to inject themselves with and explaining, hey, once you take this, there's no coming back. Are you of sound mind? Are you capable of making this decision? Do you fully understand the outcome of this? You go from that to, okay, you can't move your arms. Okay, tip your head back and I'm going to put these pills in there. Or I know your hands don't move, so hold your arm out and I'm going to inject this medicine into you and end your life. at that point, I think the bounds have been overstepped, and that should not be even an option on the table. So having someone being held responsible on a spur of the moment, like I said in the ER example, that should never even be a thing. But it was a thought that I had, and that's kind of a thought that should be expressed. Okay, moving on to number 8, limited access. Assisted suicide may only be available to those who have access to healthcare services and may therefore be more difficult for disadvantaged individuals to access. I think that something like this, if someone has insurance, that it should be covered. Maybe it's something that they find out early on enough that, okay, I do have an illness that will end my life, but I'm looking at maybe 1 to 2 years before something happens. Maybe there's a way to work this with insurance or possibly prepay for this service to take care of all my final need. There are a lot of people out there that, great, they can do that. They have insurance. They make enough money to handle a situation like that. They have time to get all their affairs in order. But there are far more people that are unable to do that. There are people that, okay, several years ago, it was only full-time workers that were even offered insurance at all. If you were a part-time worker, you weren't offered insurance, much less something to handle an end-of-life situation. Now, I think the door has pretty much opened up to full-time and part-time, at least with the company that I work with, that insurance is offered for both. But I've also seen the different tiers offered to full-time workers, and I've seen the tiers offered to part-time workers, and it's not the same at all. The options offered to full-time workers, there are several tiers, and they have different levels of coverage. The lowest tier by no means is bad. It's not terrible. It's not the one that I have. I have a higher pay structure. I'm by no means rich or well off, but I can afford the higher tiers of service. Even my employees that work with me, I mean, they're able to pay for the coverage, but some people, maybe they don't really have health events that happen through the year. They rarely get sick, but in the off chance they do, maybe they just want that low tier coverage, so they're not spending so much out of their check each week for something that they probably won't use at all throughout the year, and if they do, it's only once or twice. But the part-time coverage, it's really terrible. It is basically just paying money to a company to say, yep, I got insurance, but it doesn't really cover anything. And I mean, that's honestly sad that just based off of how much you actually work each week, that determines whether or not you have okay insurance or conceivably no insurance at all, even though you're paying for it. So, I mean, that is another kind of thing to keep in mind. How would this be offered as a blanket that would be a feasible option for everyone to use should they decide to? Going on to number 9 on my list for the con is misdiagnosis. And I was kind of hitting on this earlier, but for misdiagnosis, assisted suicide may be requested by patients who have been misdiagnosed or have not been adequate information about the nature of their illness. So a lot of this, it kind of is why I was leading into the different stages, or not stages, having more than one stream of input. Okay, if doctor number 1 says, oh, you got lung cancer and this is where you're at with it, this is what we think you have, this is your timeline that we can kind of project for you. I don't want just that one. Like I said earlier, I think there should be at least 3 verification factors to that. Doctor number 1 should say, this is what I've come up with, but just because there could be outlying factors, there could be contamination, I want to send you to doctor number 2 just to verify and confirm everything. If doctor number 2 says, yep, that's the same thing that we found, I think adding that 3rd layer of confirmation should be more than enough to give you qualifiers to say, okay, this might be an option that I need to start looking into. Number 10 on my list is value of life. This is the number 10 for cons. This is the last one. Assisted suicide may undermine the value of human life and create a culture where it's seen as acceptable to end one's one's own life rather than seeking alternative solutions to end-of-life care. I'm not saying this should be presented as the only option. I would still like to see hospice and palliative care kept in business. I've dealt with them multiple times, and with that one exception, I think they've been great. They're always such caring people, and I've even thought of, while I was actually visiting hospice, what would it be like to be one of these assistants or nurses? What would it be like to be one of these medical professionals that this is their job? They see patients that come in, and more than likely, they're not going to leave on their own accord. Every time you come into a shift, that one patient that you were chatting with on your last shift, they might not be there on the next shift. You never know. And to me, that would weigh heavier on my heart, knowing that a patient that I could care for would not be there, or possibly not be there, the next time that I came into work. That would bother me more than actually helping someone in their own life. If I were that medical professional, if my job only consisted of the end of life aspect, that as long as everything goes through the proper channels, everything is on the up and up, and the patient fully is aware and understanding of, I'm getting ready to take a medicine or a prescription that is going to end my life, then I could sit there, put that medicine in front of them within reach, explain, if you take this is going to be the last time, this is it, this is the end. Do you understand that? If that's the way they wanted to go, yes, it might be painful, especially depending on their personality. If they were really upbeat and cheerful the whole time that you're dealing with them, they have a great outlook on life, but they know that that's not going to last very long. Yeah, I'd probably go off in one of the rooms and I would shed my tears, but I would definitely feel better about that than the unknown. Everybody always has a fear of the unknown. If I'm trying to take care of a patient and then I leave my shift and then come back on the next shift just to find out, oh man, they just passed like an hour before you got here and the body's already gone. Yes, I'm not a family member, but anyone that I think in the medical field that has that feeling of attachment to a certain patient, I'm sure they could verify that weighs on them. That yes, maybe eventually over time it weighs less and less, and you find a way to block it out, or maybe you find a way to overcome it. Maybe you do certain activities while you're away from work that take your mind off of it, or however your coping mechanism is. Maybe over time that's what worked, but at the beginning, I don't think I could do that. Okay, so I've given 10 pros, I've given 10 cons, I've kind of sprinkled my thoughts and opinions in the middle throughout the whole pro and con concept. I started off with a definition of what a physician-assisted suicide is, that it is something where it is a self-induced, or the person is actually doing the actions themselves, that in their life they are just handed the medication or prescription to take to actually end their life on their own. And as long as it comes under full understanding that it is completely different from euthanasia, it's not like taking Fido down to the pound or to the vet and giving them an IV and maybe giving them some kind of anesthetic. You're not putting a person down, that this is a person that is doing this with a purpose. So with the pros and cons out of the way, and like I said, I've already sprinkled my thoughts and opinions out there. Now it's time to open the door and get the feedback from the community. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Do you feel there are some aspects that maybe I've overlooked? If you fall into any of those categories, then I would love to hear from you. Usually in the description, especially if you're on Spotify, I know it's on there, there's even a button that you can leave a voice message for me. When I was looking at the other platform, it shows up as a link in the description to leave a voice message. If that's not your cup of tea, then you can also reach me at email. My email is benshelbrook@gmail.com, benshelbrook@gmail.com. And the same thing for Twitter. There is a link on my Spotify page, but it is at Ben Shelbrook, spelled the same way, BenShelbrook. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can DM me, tweet at me, whatever. Any way that you feel comfortable to reach out to me and let me know how you feel. Let me know what's on you. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what's on your heart. Once again, I'd like to thank you for stopping by, taking the time to give me a listen. I hope to see you in the next episode. As we kind of end out the episode today, special thanks to Intertwined for the intro and outro music being provided. Great job, guys. Love it. Sounds great. If you'd like to give them a listen, if it sounds like something that you can kind of dig and groove to, I'll leave their Spotify link also in the description. And if you just kind of think, hey, I dig what you're doing, man, and you want to support me, like I said in my previous episode, this is a solo venture. I'm just trying to do my thing out here. If you want to show financial support, there's a link for Buy Me a Coffee also in the description. If that's the way you go, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And with that said, I'm going to call this the end of the episode. Keep on living the dream, and I'll see you next time. Later.